of thesis beginning of last semester was bikes in the city of Philadelphia and how that interaction happens. But to kind of expand that to include a larger array of user groups, it came to pedestrians, bicyclists, and public transportation, the conflict versus cars. And also, Philadelphia was a little bit too large of a scale to do whole, so tried to narrow it down and come up with a specific site to work with. So originally through municipal maps and just through my knowledge of the city, came up with an area from Lehigh down to South Street and from river to river. And what I did with that is I took the concept of from radical cartography that Bill Rankin did in the city of Vancouver and colored the streets by what they're known as. And what I was able to find out is that Avenue in Philadelphia at least works as main thoroughfares throughout the city. So Lehigh Avenue, Spring Garden Avenue, and Girard Avenue. So from looking at those, and from looking at what of those streets presented the most interesting circumstances, I picked Girard Avenue. And through walking on Girard and through kind of just analysis, I realized that it was made up of less than kind of this just singular line, but more of these, what Bob loves to call 7 linear nodal areas that I came up with. That was a joke, he hates that term. And the areas are 33rd to 30th, 26th to Poplar, Corinthian to Ridge, 15th to 13th, which includes Broad Street, 6th Street all the way over to Lawrence Street, 2nd Street to Frankfurt, and Susquehanna to Richmond Street. So that was the end of the first semester. So stepping back at the beginning of this semester, looked at Girard again as a whole and looking at the intensity of the interactions that happen on the street, and also at the location, frequency, and I guess time between stops, 4 SEPTA stops along the way, and I came up with these 14 different intersections. And from that, from looking at knowing maps of how the buildings and the spaces operate and the openness of them, and the conflict between cars and trolleys, cars and bicyclists, cars and pedestrians, and pedestrians and bicyclists, I came up with these maps, and based off of that, picked Front and Girard as the site to work on. So then jumping to kind of understand how Front and Girard operates in the city. This is a map just to give the context of it. This is Front Street, starting up at Tusculum, and this is Girard with this context here, and how it's based in the city, and to some of the parks just to give a little bit of context for it. This map shows movement of cars and bicyclists on the site, basically of which streets are used, and the intensity and speed of the traffic. And what's helpful from this is to show that in terms of use, Front really terminates at Girard Street, and that's going to be helpful later in explaining some of the decisions I made in the design. This here shows kind of just popular and upper and coming areas. This is areas in Fishtown, and this is the Northern Liberties area, and this is the site right here, so it can kind of act as a bridge between those two areas and link it. This is just a quick residential map, shows lots of density around the area, but none immediately at the site, and it also shows that the site is right at the center of this commercial corridor, but not nearly as much green space around it as it could be. So that could be something that could be implemented there. Then moving on to the needs of the bicyclist, something that I originally started with. I thought of 3 different needs that bicyclists have. One is sight lines. As you're biking, can you see cross-moving traffic so as not to be struck by a vehicle? Not such a good idea. Space for cyclists, just the space on the street to move about. Wider streets usually work better. One-way streets that are normal width, but so then you can kind of control the traffic. And bailout options, which is something that kind of just came up with in terms of if a car is barreling down behind you, can you jump onto the sidewalk easily to avoid it? And those circumstances happen either when streets are not allowed to, you're not allowed to park on one side, or just the density of parking is not great. So from all this maps, it was shown that the intersection of Front and Girard lacks all of those to a major extent. So that's something that I wanted to deal with in dealing with the project. This is an only map of the area, just showing the the openness of the site and just showing which buildings are open and how they open up onto the street. This is a map that shows the land use. It's parking, abandoned buildings, and open land. And so I looked at that in terms of what is unused and underused on the site, and how could that be reappropriated for different things in the future. This map finally down here talks about the ways that pedestrians and bicyclists move around the site and where they stop and congregate or where they're stopped to wait for traffic. And the dots show all of the parking that's available on the site, which is really sporadic and not that great of an intensity. So thinking of those things and thinking of what space was available there, I had this map that shows the community gardens in and around the area, so something to use that open land for and to kind of plug a program into it. And something that kind of just dovetails nicely into it is Sustainable 19125, which is an initiative that started just in February to make 19125 the greenest zip code in the city. So they're asking a lot of questions, searching for initiatives to have stuff done. So it gets me to my design, which is to tear down a lot of the buildings and turn them into these growing areas or some type of a community garden. So it frees up about 4 acres of land to give more space on the sidewalk on the north side of the street, which gets more sunlight and to just allow more area for congregation. The trolley was pushed down, and to kind of flip the script in a way on the way that cars interact with pedestrians, all of this becomes sidewalks, and on top of that I imposed this 5-foot by 5-foot grid of these cruciform columns, and then subtracted from them based on analysis of how the site is used and future intended use of how I'd like to shape the interaction. So those can be shown over here, and you can see it a little bit here. Yes, so those columns are there to be basically to imply use and to imply movement throughout the site, but they also allow for, this is an image of it right here you can see, when it's just standing by itself, it acts as this barrier, but you can also lock a bike to it. But what you can also do with, I just came up with these base bracket, divider brackets, supporting bracket, is you can plug program into it to make it into pretty much anything you'd like it to be. So a lot of the poles in this abandoned building, which I'm reappropriating the underside for a farmer's market, are made into these sellers tables, but it can be made into a picnic bench, a shelter, bleachers, a half dividing wall, a covered bench, trolley stop, bench, whatever your mind comes up with to create these things, you could do with that. So then it becomes this area that can be manipulated by the user. One thing that I did forget to mention is this connection path. So through knocking out all of this land, which on here, this is all growing area, which is, then I put a path through, so it's this rigid path that connects Northern Liberties to Fishtown, but as it comes through here, it kind of widens out, disperses, and then comes back together as it, again, enters this area to continue the path along.
Could you explain that again on the biggest
the connection path?
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of the land that was, you can't see it all, but the path starts here, comes through, comes up, and this is kind of user-defined of how you're going to move about through the path, and then up here it's defined again. So what that comes from is there was a lot of unused land that's just overgrown with weeds or abandoned buildings that were knocked down. So those were reappropriated to grow crops, whatever you will, in those areas. And through that land, this path is set up to connect the Northern Liberties neighborhood to the Fishtown neighborhood. So a metaphorical as well as a literal connection. And those are just some renderings that explain it. This is an overall rendering. This is a rendering showing you approaching from the north. This is a rendering approaching from the south. This is approaching from this side, and this is approaching from here. And the ones in the corners just give you a little background information of how it looks. And that is my project.
Could you describe a little bit more of these sections here?